Hello and welcome back to my sofa for another edition of Spooky Story Time. Okay, let's see. What number is this? Oh, we're at number 6 now. Okay. So, before we get started, we have to have some spooky ambiance. Okay. All right, so I rented space in an art gallery to use as a pottery studio over my summer break. And it was on a main street of a small town, and so all of the buildings were all lined up along the street. They all shared walls. So it was a very old building, and my space was in the basement of the building at the bottom of these large, heavy wooden stairs. And I was really a night owl. At that time, my husband was working nights, and so rather than just be at home by myself, really late at night, like stupidly late at night on like weekdays, I would sneak off and go to this art gallery. I would use my key to open the back door of the building. So I'd like park in an alley, go into the back door, I would lock it securely behind me, and then I would go down the stairs and I would use the kick wheel down there, thump thump, and I would throw pots and I would make mugs and bowls and just try to be creative and be productive. But it was just so soothing being there when nobody else was there. The whole main street's just dead. There's just like a couple of bars and restaurants. But for the most part, like, it's hair salons and hardware store, and there's like a jewelry shop, and they're all closed. And so I had my boom box, and I had a few CDs that I was really listening to a lot. I was sort of in this sort of 1920s vibe at the time, so it was very like old school sort of jazz recordings, so you could still hear the crackling and popping on the recording, and I just thought that was really soothing. And even if I would flip over to NPR, it seemed like they were also playing this old jazz sort of music. And I just was really enjoying that at the time. And I was really channeling that in my art. So late at night, I would come in, I was listening to the radio. And then once in a while, I would hear those stairs creak in sequence. And sometimes when I hear them creaking, I also heard bottles jiggling around like in a box. And it was so spooky. And I just thought, maybe this was a bar at one time, or like a restaurant. Oh, maybe there's a cooler in the basement or something, and they brought bottles up from the basement. And there's this residual noise, of what this building used to be. But I was thinking more than likely, I was just imagining it or whatever. But once in a while, I would like turn the music off and I'd like really listen when it started. And then sometimes when I turn the music off, it would like stop or whatever. But it was just this thing. And I didn't get into the studio to work as much as I wanted to. So it was really sporadic when I was going to be there. Toward the end of the summer, I had this open house where I had my pottery and there was a few other artists and we were mingling around and we were having wine and cheese and talking about our artwork. And then the owner of the building called me over and she mentioned that this building is maybe haunted. There is, spooky things that happen. And so people that had been in the building late at night were sort of sharing their encounters of the building being haunted. And there was somebody that was there and they worked in the building on the other side of the wall that shared a wall with this building. And they said, like I run a bar that's on the other side of this wall. And he said, there's been a few times this summer, and I swear to you, like I go downstairs, like, and I can hear jazz music, like playing. And I died. I was like, that was me. I was playing jazz music. It was like, what? Like, yeah, I was going to the building like in the middle of the night and listening to jazz music. It was like, why would you do that? And so it turns out that it was this guy coming down into the basement. And so his stairs were lining up perfectly with the stairs in this building. So as he came down the stairs, it was making stair noises right where my staircase was. So we had been scaring the crap out of each other all summer which is really stupid, but also maybe kind of amusing. Okay, so we'll follow that story up with... Something just made a noise. Matt's making dinner in the other room, so there's a dog that's scratching at my door too, but there was a different sort of noise that happened over there. But anyway, we're cool. Everything's fine. Okay, so we'll follow that story up with a story that I heard told from a friend of mine in high school. So I was having a sleepover with this friend and a few of my other friends, and instead of it being at her parents' house, because her parents were like really, really over the top, strict, conservative, and it was no fun having sleepovers at their house. So instead, we had a sleepover at her older sister's apartment in town, which was the coolest thing ever. Like, they let us watch scary movies, like we got to order in food, and her apartment was just so cool. It was really old, and she lived there with her husband. And so they didn't pay too much attention to us, but like later on in the evening they kind of came out, and they were having some beers because they were older and very cool, and they told us this story. I'm pretty sure my friend prompted them to tell this story. Okay, so when they were newly married, which was actually very recently, it was like earlier that year, maybe not more than like a year before, they were given a property from the family. Like, an elderly relative had lived there, like maybe her grandmother or something, and they had moved her into a home. And the family member that owned this property had rented it out in the past, and it had not been very well taken care of by the renters. They were always sort of abusive to the house, and they just had really bad luck. Like, they didn't really want to be renting it out, but it was hard to sell property in that area. So finally, this person in the family just gets married, and so they're like, oh, perfect. Please rent this house. Like, we know we can trust you. We know you're not going to trash the place. This is perfect. So they're like, yeah, absolutely. And they're like, okay, so you fix up this poor house, and for every month that you spend working on it, we'll pay for some of the repairs, and also, we'll even not charge you rent as long as you're working on the house to fix it up. And so even though the house was in pretty, like, not good shape, they thought that was a pretty great deal, and they were broke, so they were like, yes, let's do that. And so I think they're really, really itching to move into this house because their parents are both conservative enough that they don't feel comfortable like moving in together until they have their own place. So they're living separately even though they're married. So finally they have the house, the heat's on, the water is on, like they're ready. They're just going to move into this house, even though I think they were sleeping on like, a mattress on the floor or whatever. And they're working really hard, trying to fix it up. And so one night, the husband is working on some sort of leak that has happened, and so he'd been working on that during the day. And so she figured, okay, if this leak is finally going to get fixed, then this area that had been damaged because the leak had not been addressed for a while, so there was like staining on the ceiling, and the wallpaper in the corner where the stain was, like the wallpaper had started to swell up, and so she was thinking, I wonder what's behind this wallpaper. The wallpaper had been painted and re-wallpapered and painted, like this poor farmhouse. So she thinks, okay, well, the wallpaper's bubbled up in this area, so really it's going to have to come off here anyway, so this will be a good place, like a test piece to figure out what's back here. So she pulls the wallpaper down in the corner of the room, and, just as she'd feared, there's like lots of layer. And the plaster seemed to look okay. And so she kind of stopped what she was doing. She didn't want to go any further until they had time to really sit down and discuss what the heck they were going to do there. And so she just sort of left the corner of the wall, like just the wallpaper just peeled off. And then they decided to stop and like microwave some pizza rolls or whatever and just quit for the night. So they, had the little TV, they put a movie and they were watching a movie, they were eating their pizza rolls. And she said that like she just was overcome by this sense that like there was someone in the house. Like there was just this uncomfortable like pressure on her, like she was being watched. And she kind of like mid bite into pizza roll or whatever looks over at her husband on the sofa, and he's just looking at her, and his expression is a little sullen, and he, in telling the story, he's thinking, somebody's in his house, we are being watched. And of course, them telling us this story after watching a scary movie, and we're like all huddled up on the couch and we're just like, what's gonna happen? And they said, they after looking at each other and exchanging telepathically this doom, they both looked over their shoulder up at the corner of the wall where the leak had been and where the paper was now pulled away from the plaster. And right up there in that corner, they said there was an eye, like, on the wall. And I was like, you mean like there was a hole in the plaster and like somebody was looking through the plaster at you? And they were like, no. It was like this disembodied eye that was like coming from the plaster. Like it wasn't someone in the house watching them. It was like the house was watching them. And they packed everything up very quickly and they left that house and they never went back to that house. And I know where that house is, and they moved into an apartment in town, and that's, where they were living. And I know that they, I remember distinctly, they opened up a hole on the property and they pushed the house into this hole. Because, it was sort of a nuisance property, I guess. Like, nobody would rent it, and it didn't seem like it could get fixed up. And so, yeah, they just pushed it into a hole. And then they, bulldozed dirt over top of it. And so now, when I drive past where this house was, it's like, it's so weird to see, like, this flattened area. And there's, like, a few evergreen trees where the windbreak used to be, but, like, that house is gone. Okay, so I don't know if I have any other stories off the top of my head, so there might be a big pause on spooky story time for a while, unless I come up with something else that I really just forgot. I was kind of hoping that while I was going through this, it would, as I'm thinking of these stories that I haven't thought about in a while, I was hoping that something would come to the surface that I forgot, but so far no. So anyway, well, I hope you enjoyed that, and yeah, all right, so that, until further notice, that concludes story time. Bye!